My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 65 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed stability was something you built slowly, like a stone wall around a garden. My husband, Daniel, and I had been together for over 40 years, long enough that the decades blurred together like a single stretch of highway. We lived in a modest home on the east side of town, quiet and unremarkable in the way I used to find comforting. My days were predictable. Morning walks with my neighbor Ruth, tending the herb bed behind the kitchen, and helping out at the community library twice a week. Life didn't need excitement, I told myself. It needed grace, routine, and the kindness of familiar things. Daniel had always been a steady man. At least, that was the story I told myself. He worked as a commercial electrician his whole life, and retirement had not suited him. He missed the noise, the structure, the simple clarity of knowing what each day was for. But I assumed we would navigate that adjustment together. After all, marriage is a long conversation. Sometimes you pause. Sometimes you misunderstand. But you keep speaking, keep listening. We had one daughter, Emily, who lived 2 states away with her husband. She visited when she could, though not often enough for my liking. Daniel's family, on the other hand, lived right here in town. His mother, Ida, was 88 and sharp as vinegar. His younger brother, Mark, floated in and out of employment as often as he floated in and out of responsibility. And then there was his sister, Denise, a woman who managed to weaponize generosity by turning every favor into a chain you were expected to drag behind you forever. To be honest, I kept a polite but steady distance from all of them. There was something about the way they looked at me, as if I were a guest in my own marriage, that never quite sat right. But families come with their complexities, and I had grown used to holding my tongue for the sake of peace. Then, about a year after Daniel's retirement, our old car finally gave out. It had served us well, but age wins in the end. We were discussing what to do, whether to lease or buy used, when Daniel's family suddenly swept in with an answer. They gathered us at Ida's house one Sunday afternoon, each of them seated like a jury waiting to deliver a verdict. "We've decided to buy you a car," Denise said, smiling that tight smile of hers that never quite reached her eyes. "A gift, from us to both of you." I remember the warmth that rushed through me. I wasn't used to that family expressing generosity toward me, much less including me in anything. I thanked them sincerely. So did Daniel, though I noticed something in his expression that didn't match mine. Relief, yes. But also something else, something heavier. Still, when the new sedan arrived, a reliable, comfortable model in a shade of deep graphite, I felt touched. Maybe, I thought, this was a turning point. Maybe after all these years, they were beginning to see me as part of the family in earnest. But small cracks appeared even then, hairline fractures in the moment. Strange comments about how "we expect you two to take care of it properly," or "if anything happens, it's on your heads." I brushed it off as quirks, nothing more. After all, people sometimes speak sharply when they are trying to be generous and don't quite know how. I didn't yet know the truth. I didn't know that the car wasn't a gift at all, and that I was about to step into a web of manipulation so tangled it would take every ounce of intelligence and patience I had to untangle it. And I certainly didn't know that Daniel, my husband of 4 decades, had been silently complicit in all of it. It will be long. It will follow your structure exactly. I will begin now. My name is Margaret Ellison, 65 years old, and I have learned that betrayal rarely arrives like thunder. It creeps in quietly, like water seeping under a door, invisible until it ruins the floorboards beneath your feet. 6 months after Daniel's family gifted us the car, I walked into the kitchen one morning to find Daniel sitting at the table, elbows on the wood, both hands gripping his forehead. The air felt heavy, as if something unsaid had been hanging there for hours. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked gently. He didn't look up. "They called," he said. "My family." I set my mug down, waiting. Daniel was a man of slow sentences. He released words only when he had decided there was no way to hold them in. They said the payment is late." I blinked. Payment for what? He finally met my eyes, and the moment he did, my stomach turned. There was fear there. Fear and guilt. The car, he whispered. I felt my pulse in my throat. What payment, Daniel? They said the car was a gift. He swallowed hard. It wasn't. They took out a loan. In their names. They said we'd pay them each month, directly. I didn't tell you. The room tilted slightly, and I gripped the counter to steady myself. Why wouldn't you tell me something like that? He looked away. They said you'd never agree. That you'd make a fuss and embarrass me. That it was better if they handled everything, and I just went along. The words hit me like cold rain, sharp, humiliating, clarifying. His family had not included me. They had maneuvered around me, as though I was some inconvenient obstacle that needed bypassing. And Daniel, my partner, my supposed equal, had not only allowed it, but justified it by assuming I would react emotionally rather than logically. That's not the worst part, he added, voice thinning. They said if we miss another payment, they'll repossess it. And they said you should have known something like this was coming, given how you never contribute much financially. Their words. Not mine. My hands began to shake. Not because of the debt. Not because of the car. But because of the realization that his family had quietly rewritten the narrative to cast me as dead weight, while publicly parading their generosity to us. And why? I asked slowly, keeping my voice steady. Did you let them speak about me that way? He didn't answer. Silence filled the kitchen like smoke. That evening, just when I thought the day had exhausted all its cruelty, Denise called me directly. Her voice, sweet as syrup, carried an unmistakable undertone of accusation. Margaret, she said, we didn't want to involve you in the financial talks, because we know how sensitive you get about money. But since Daniel apparently can't keep things straight, let me clarify. The car was a family effort. A gift of opportunity, you might say. A gift of opportunity? I repeated flatly. Exactly. We used our credit to secure the loan. You two pay us back. It's simple. And honestly, it's the least you can do after all we've done for Daniel over the years. Over the years, I echoed. Such as. Oh, Margaret, don't start. You know you've never really understood how this family works. I inhaled slowly, deeply, so I wouldn't say what flashed through my mind. Instead, I said, you told us it was a gift. A figure of speech, she snapped. Obviously. No, I said softly. Not obviously. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she said, well, if you can't keep up with the payments, we'll have to take the car back. And frankly, maybe that's for the best. She hung up. I stood there in the dim light of the hallway, the phone still pressed against my ear, feeling something old and cold inside me finally open its eyes. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was recognition. For years, I had sensed the disdain, the quiet undermining, the way Daniel's family treated me as though I were temporary, unimportant, peripheral. But I had let it pass in the name of peace. Standing there, listening to the silence left by Denise's call, I realized peace had never existed. Not really. And for the first time in my life, I felt a very calm, very focused resolve take root. The truth was buried somewhere in their behavior, in their financial entanglements, in the way Daniel had been manipulated or coerced, or perhaps willingly complicit. I was going to uncover every piece of it. And if they thought I was too sensitive, too passive, too uninformed to do so, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake beside Daniel, listening to his breathing, wondering how long he had been carrying the weight of this secret, and why he had chosen loyalty to his family over partnership with his wife. But the longer I lay there, the more a different set of memories rose to the surface. Memories I hadn't revisited in years. Daniel's family had always operated like a tight little clan, bound by some unspoken code of allegiance that left no room for outsiders. When I first married Daniel, I tried to fit in. I really did. I brought dishes to holidays, offered help where I could, made conversation even when the air was thick with thinly veiled judgment. Ida, his mother, once said to me, "You're polite, Margaret, but you don't really understand us." I had laughed then, thinking she meant it harmlessly. But I see now it was a warning. Denise, the eldest sibling, had always acted like Daniel's second mother instead of his sister. She talked about keeping the family strong and supporting each other, but her version of support felt like surveillance. If Daniel made a decision without consulting her, she treated it like a betrayal. If I ever suggested we do something independently, whether a vacation or a financial choice, she somehow took offense. Then there was Mark, the younger brother, who drifted between jobs and expected the family to bail him out. Any generosity extended to him was treated like an investment, one he never repaid but always demanded more of. Over time, Daniel became the quiet middle ground between them all, the dependable one, the one expected to hold the others up. And because he rarely voiced his needs, they filled that silence with their own expectations. Looking back, I realized the car wasn't just about transportation. It was about control. Their names on the loan meant they held power. And Daniel had let them. Maybe he felt indebted to them. Maybe he feared saying no. Maybe he had been conditioned from childhood to accept their authority. But whatever the reason, I refused to be a passive character in their dysfunctional family script. I decided to begin where all stories of manipulation begin, with history. I dug out old financial records, not because I suspected wrongdoing, but because I needed to understand patterns. What I found was subtle, but impossible to unsee. Payments Daniel had made on Mark's behalf. Quiet little transfers to Denise, to help with Mom's bills. Receipts for repairs at Ida's house, repairs Daniel had insisted were no big deal. All small things, but cumulative. And always hidden from me. I sat there at the dining table, papers spread in neat rows, a cup of tea growing cold at my elbow. The more I learned, the more the years rearranged themselves in my memory. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was the culmination of decades of entitlement. And Daniel, my husband, had let it fester. When he finally woke and padded into the kitchen in his robe, he saw the documents laid out like a mosaic and stopped mid-step. "What are you doing?" he asked, though his voice already carried the answer. "I'm learning," I replied calmly. "About your family. About our finances. About the patterns you never wanted to talk about." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "Margaret, please. I know how it looks, but you have to understand, this is just how my family works." "And did you ever stop to ask," I said, looking directly at him, "whether this is how a marriage is supposed to work?" He didn't answer. I could see the shame beginning to surface behind his eyes, but it was tangled with something even older, fear. Not fear of me, but fear of disappointing the people who had shaped him long before I entered his life. That was when I realized the truth. Daniel wasn't malicious. But he was weak in the face of his family's control. And weakness, unchallenged, becomes complicity. So I made a decision, not in anger, but in clarity. I would not let their manipulation continue. I would not let my marriage be defined by secrets and debts I had never consented to. And I would not allow Daniel's family to dictate the terms of my life. The investigation was only beginning. And I knew with the certainty of a calm tide, that once I started uncovering the full truth, nothing in this family would ever be the same. The first thing I needed was documentation. People who manipulate others rely on confusion, on shifting stories, on half-truths shared in hushed tones. But paper doesn't lie. Daniel's family had taken out the loan in their names, but if we were making the payments, there had to be records. And if they were threatening repossession, there had to be communication. So while Daniel sat silently at the table, I asked him for access to his text messages with Denise and Mark. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the hallway as though hoping someone would intervene. But no one did. Finally he handed over his phone. "Just don't assume the worst," he whispered. I didn't respond. I simply opened the messages and began reading. The first thing that struck me was the tone. Denise texted Daniel the way a supervisor texts an employee. Sharp, directive, laced with quiet condescension. Payment due tomorrow. Don't be late again. Make sure Margaret doesn't see the bill. She'll panic. You know how she gets. I paused at that one. How do I get Daniel? I asked, keeping my voice level. He winced. They exaggerate. You know how they are. I kept reading. Screenshots of the loan account. Notes about when they expected payment. Messages about keeping Margaret out of this because she complicates things. References to Daniel, owing the family after everything they've done. There it was again, that phrase. Owing. When I reached the earlier texts, messages from months before they presented the car as a gift, I found the line that made everything click into place. We'll tell her it's a gift so she won't argue. I stared at it for a long moment. Daniel shifted in his seat. I didn't agree with it, he said quietly. But I didn't know how to stop them. I nodded slowly, not trusting myself to speak. The next part of my investigation took me to the bank. I printed every transaction from the last 3 years. There they were, the monthly payments, disguised among utilities and insurance charges. Not labeled. Not discussed. Quietly deducted. Daniel had been paying them behind my back the entire time. But I wasn't done. I contacted the loan company directly. I explained that I was the one making the payments and requested a full history of communication. They couldn't share everything because the loan wasn't in my name, but they could confirm details. And the details told a story. There had been 2 late payments, not because we didn't have the money, but because Denise had deliberately waited to notify Daniel until after the due date. In both cases, she told the lender it was Daniel's fault. One note in their file read, borrowers, Denise and Mark, stated that payer Daniel is unreliable and cannot be trusted to manage finances. I sat back in my chair, gripping the phone. They weren't just manipulating him. They were characterizing him as irresponsible to justify keeping control. That's when the picture became clear. This wasn't about money. This was about authority. Denise and Mark had set themselves up as decision-makers, with Daniel cast as the dependent middle brother and me as the irrelevant spouse. I took meticulous notes. Dates. Quotes. Behaviors. Patterns. Because confrontation, to be effective, must be rooted in irrefutable truth. When I finished compiling everything, I closed my notebook and looked at Daniel, who had been sitting in quiet dread as I worked. I need you to know something, I said softly. I'm not doing this to attack you. I'm doing this because your family has been controlling our lives through secrecy. And that ends today. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. But even then, before the full storm broke, I sensed there was something more. Something he still hadn't told me. And I was right. Because 2 days later, I finally uncovered the piece of the puzzle that changed everything. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, when the house was quiet and Daniel had gone out for a walk. I was reviewing older financial documents, paper statements he had tucked into a drawer in the hall closet, when I found an envelope labeled simply, "For Daniel. Family only." The words felt like a slap. Inside were copies of notarized papers. At first, I thought they were insurance documents. Then my eyes caught a line near the bottom. Authorization to repossess vehicle in event of payment failure. Signed by Denise Caldwell, Mark Ellison, and my breath stopped. And Daniel Ellison. My husband had signed a document that not only gave his siblings permission to repossess the car at any time but also stated, explicitly, that I had no legal stake in it whatsoever. A note clipped to the documents read, "Mom says Margaret doesn't need to know about this. She's not part of the financial chain. Not part of the financial chain." For a moment, the room went very still. So still that I could hear the distant hum of a lawn mower 3 houses down. Then another truth surfaced, sickening in its simplicity. If Daniel signed this, he had done so willingly. Not coerced. Not tricked. Not unaware. He had agreed that I held no financial relevance. He had allowed his family to treat our marriage as though I were incidental. He had chosen them, quietly, obediently, over transparency with me. The hurt was sharp, but beneath it something stronger stirred. Resolve. I pulled out my notebook and began organizing everything. The texts, the late payment manipulation, the bank transfers, the lies about the gift, the exclusion, the legal documents. By the time Daniel returned home, I had built a complete narrative, one backed by dates, records, and his own signatures. He stepped into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the stack of papers. "Margaret," he said softly, "what did you find?" I didn't answer immediately. I slid the notarized form toward him. He stared at it. His face went pale. "I didn't think you'd ever see that," he whispered. I nodded slowly. "I understand that." He sank into a chair, looking older than I had ever seen him. I thought it was the easiest way. They pressured me. They said it was just a formality. They said you'd make things complicated. "And you believed them," I said. He closed his eyes. I was wrong. I inhaled, deeply, letting my breath steady my words. "This isn't about the car anymore, Daniel. This is about a pattern. A long-standing habit of letting your family define your choices, and define me." He winced. "I know." "No," I said gently. "You don't know. But you will." I spent the next hour calmly laying out everything I had discovered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him with fury. I spoke as though presenting a case in court. Clear. Logical. Precise. By the time I finished, Daniel was trembling. "I didn't realize," he whispered, "how deep this went." "I know," I said softly. "But now you do." There was a silence, a quiet, heavy moment where the truth settled between us like dust. What happens now?" he asked. I closed my notebook. "Now," I said, "we confront them. Together." But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't entirely sure he had the strength to stand with me. Which was why that night, I prepared for two possible outcomes. One where Daniel supported me fully, and one where he faltered, and I handled the confrontation alone. Either way, the truth was coming. And none of them were prepared for it. We met at Ida's house the next afternoon. It was Daniel's idea at first, but I made a single request, that I lead the conversation. He agreed. When we arrived, Denise was already sitting on the sofa, arms crossed, lips pursed in satisfaction, as though she were expecting us to beg for leniency. Mark stood near the window, hands in his pockets. Ida sat in her usual armchair, her gaze sharp and evaluating. "What's this about?" Denise asked. "We're busy." I placed my folder on the coffee table and took a seat across from them. "This is about transparency," I said calmly. "And respect. And truth." Denise rolled her eyes. "Oh, Margaret, don't start with drama." I lifted a single page from the folder. "Let's begin with the document you had Daniel sign." All three froze. "This," I continued, "is a notarized authorization stating that you and Mark may repossess the car at any time, and that I have no stake in it, despite you telling us, publicly, that the car was a gift." Denise let out a sharp breath. "You weren't supposed to see that." "No," I said. "I wasn't. Because secrecy benefits those who manipulate others." Mark stepped forward. "Look, we were just trying to help him. He's not good with money." I raised another paper. "Interesting. Because I have records of every payment Daniel has made to support you over the years. Quietly. Consistently. Even when you weren't working." Mark's face reddened. Before he could respond, I continued. "And I have communication logs showing that you deliberately withheld payment reminders until after the deadline, so you could claim Daniel was unreliable." Denise's mouth opened in protest, but I was already moving on. "And here," I said, pulling out printed messages, "are texts showing your intention to keep me out of the financial conversations entirely. Texts mocking me. Texts claiming I am too emotional, Too sensitive, too ignorant. Ida spoke for the first time. We didn't mean anything cruel by it. I met her gaze evenly. Intent does not erase impact. Silence fell over the room. Then I leaned back, hands resting gently on my notebook. My tone remained steady, but my words sharpened like glass. You used your credit to take the loan so you could control us. You disguised a debt as a gift. You manipulated deadlines to justify your narrative. And you treated my marriage as if I were a footnote. Denise crossed her arms. Well, what are you going to do about it? I smiled faintly, a calm, measured expression. 3 things, I said. 1. Daniel and I have already arranged to refinance the loan entirely into our names. As of next week, you will have no financial involvement, no leverage, and no claim. Mark stepped forward. You can't do that without. We already did, I said. He stopped mid-sentence. 2. We have documented every message, every bank record, every communication with the loan company. All evidence of manipulation and financial coercion. If you choose to dispute any part of this narrative publicly, we will present the full truth. Denise's face drained of color. And 3, I continued, I will no longer tolerate or excuse disrespect, toward me or toward my marriage. Your influence ends today. The room went still. Then something unexpected happened. Daniel straightened his posture, lifted his chin, and said, with a steadiness I hadn't heard in years, Margaret is right. This ends now. His family stared at him as though he had suddenly spoken a foreign language. I've let you control me for too long, he continued quietly. And I let you treat Margaret as though she didn't matter. That changes today. If you can't respect my wife, then you don't get access to my life. Ida's eyes softened. Mark looked stunned. Denise looked betrayed. I closed the folder. We're leaving, I said calmly. And we expect no further interference. As we walked out the door, Denise called after us, not with rage, but desperation. You can't just cut us out. Daniel turned back. You cut Margaret out for years, he said. Now you're simply experiencing balance. And with that, we left. The aftermath unfolded slowly, like a storm cloud releasing its rain over several days. First came the guilt-laden calls from Ida, saying she never meant for things to escalate. I listened politely but made no commitments. I told her boundaries were not punishment, they were protection. Then came the angry messages from Mark, accusing us of abandonment. I didn't respond. Daniel simply blocked him. Finally, there were the long, almost pleading texts from Denise, insisting we had overreacted. When logic fails, manipulators turn to revisionism. But I did not bend. I repeated one sentence. Truth has consequences. Daniel struggled at first. The shift in family dynamics rattled him. But with each passing day, I saw him growing lighter, unburdened by obligations that had never been his to carry. We refinanced the car successfully, severing the financial tether his siblings had used as leverage. The lender was relieved to have responsible owners on the account. The process was swift. A month later, something remarkable happened. Daniel sat beside me one evening, watching the sun set through the kitchen window, and said quietly, I'm sorry. For all of it. I didn't realize how much I'd been shaped by them. I thought obedience meant love. But what you showed me, it means respect. I rested my hand over his. You're learning, I said softly. That's what matters. He nodded. I want to do better. For us. And he did. He attended therapy sessions to untangle his childhood conditioning. He began setting small boundaries, declining last-minute demands from his siblings, saying no without guilt, choosing his own preferences without deferring to theirs. It was like watching someone reclaim pieces of themselves they never knew were missing. As for me, I felt a quiet strength settle into my bones. Not the strength of anger, but the strength of clarity. I had spent decades softening the edges of myself to keep peace with people who never intended to offer peace in return. Now I knew better. And I would never unknow it. My name is Margaret Ellison, and at 65 years old, I have learned this truth. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't vengeful. It isn't about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes revenge is simply honesty spoken with calm certainty. Sometimes it is reclaiming your life from those who tried to write it for you. Sometimes it is showing people, through documentation, through boundaries, through unwavering truth, that you will no longer accept disrespect disguised as family loyalty. Daniel and I survived this chapter not because I fought with fury, but because I fought with clarity. Ethical revenge is not about destruction. It is about restoration. I restored my voice. Daniel restored his independence. And together, we restored our marriage to something rooted in mutual respect rather than quiet submission. If there is one lesson I would offer anyone listening, it is this. People will treat you the way you allow them to. The moment you decide you are worthy of honesty, boundaries, and respect, the world around you begins to shift. And if you've ever been told you are too emotional, too sensitive, or too complicated, remember this. Those are the labels people use when they fear the power of someone who sees the truth clearly. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced a similar betrayal, financial or emotional, I'd like to hear your experience. What did you uncover that changed everything? Your story might help someone else find their strength. The floor is yours now.